Let's give a huge round of applause for Carmine Grimaldi.
So I need to start by sharing some potentially troubling news, which is that the Videodrome is indeed real, and we are the new flesh. I doubt, though, this is news to any of you. The uncanny coterminous feeling we have with our screens, the sort of half-alive feeling we have through unaccountable data, the inseparable feeling of algorithms that feed and feed off our consciousness. But Cronenberg's film isn't just a fictional prophecy of our current dystopia. It's a documentary of our video past. For by the time Cronenberg made Videodrome, a keen observer would have already noticed monstrous video humanoids living among us. Perhaps we even felt the coaxial cables creeping along our ligaments, the magnetic tape wrapping around our thoughts. What Cronenberg did was notice these monsters all around us and, like any alchemist or astrologer worth their salt, recognize that these monstrosities were inauspicious omens. The term monster, after all, comes from the Latin to warn. When one appears, you know that cosmic trouble will soon follow. I'm a historian of media, but I like to think that I'm a cryptozoologist of our technological past. When I do my research, I'm always on the lookout for sightings, reports, images, descriptions of one of these elusive monsters. The first I found appeared, not coincidentally, mere miles away from the invention of videotape in Palo Alto in 1956. Tape transport comes to life, the company announced in their internal newspaper, and we see here photographic evidence of a tape machine sprouting the form of a young girl. Or perhaps a young girl metamorphosing into videotape. Just a few years later, near San Francisco, another trace of this monstrous form. This time, it's recorded in a doctor's notebook in which he sketched one of these creatures appropriating the body of a therapist. The inventors of videotape, Ampex Corporation, wouldn't have been surprised that their creation spawned these Frankensteinian forms. Rather, from the beginning, they sought to produce them. You see, videotape was not originally intended to be a medium to distribute movies. It was intended to be used in everyday life to wend its way into courtrooms, classrooms, hospitals, psychiatric clinics, and any other institution that would accept it. It offered something that no other medium did: the ability to instantly watch what was recorded, to engage dynamically with the recordings, to have the recording shape the very possibilities of action and thought. With videotape, the subject could watch themselves. The object was the subject. Anyone now could live within television. Like any organism, at first the video monsters were relatively rare, but in the late 60s there was something like a Cambrian explosion of speciation, a moment when the original monstrous form multiplied into thousands. No longer simple hybrids between humans and machines. These are more clearly the direct ancestors to the monsters that Cronenberg must have encountered and filmed. Wires become nerves, the boundary between organic and mechanical dissolve. In 1971, we see a sketch from a witness of one of Videodrome's first victims, the limp hand of its prey dangling out of the cathode ray tube. It's worth asking, why did these monsters proliferate at this time in the late 60s? The answer seems to lie in the role of the artist as a form of cross-pollinator. This is the moment when video entered the world of culture and artists moved between various institutions, exploring video feedback as a way of altering people's senses. Most notably at the time was the magazine Radical Software, which first came out in 1970. It became for a few years the main venue for those who wanted to build territories for living with and within videotape, as they often called it, the noosphere. These large-scale experiments, hyper-mediated video zones where humans and machines live together, seems to have unlocked some new unbridled force, offering ideal conditions to harbor and create video monstrosities. This was their ecological niche. These were places like Dr. Oblivion's cathode ray mission, churches, or perhaps factories to the new video order. There were dozens of these that sprouted up in the 60s and early 70s. And I want to tell you briefly about two of them. And not coincidentally, both of the people that created these were devotees of Marshall McLuhan, who is the inspiration for Dr. Oblivion. The first of these was founded in 1967 on the city corner, not unlike the cathode ray mission, and informally called the hippie drug ward. If you were walking around the Haight-Ashbury at the peak of the countercultural revolution, you might have seen a sign of this pasted on a telephone pole. It was an institution developed by a psychiatrist, Dr. Harry Wilmer, and was set up for wayward teenagers who were coming of age in the late 60s. They were said to be the first generation that was raised on television, which, many commentators speculated, was the reason they didn't play nice with the establishment. To many in the squarer corners of America, TV had already produced a monstrous mutation in society. Wilmer thought that it would be possible to tame the new energy if he shifted the balance of televisual power. Rather than passively viewing broadcast TV, he wanted the patients to make and live through television. The poison, in other words, could also be the medicine. As Wilmer described it, the ward was a mix between a far-out school, a free-floating media center, and an electronic therapeutic community. Dozens of kids lived in the ward, spending their time recording and being recorded, watching themselves on TV, becoming one with the cathode ray tube. One patient wrote in a notebook, "When I first came here, I was scared to death of those things, the TV cameras, because I thought they were only there to manipulate us all around. Then it finally occurred to me that they were kind of helpful hints along the way to make us human. To enter the institution as something other than human, and through video, become human. That's what Wilmer promised to his patients, and that was at least what some of his patients thought. Or perhaps it was less that they were becoming human, but embracing a new form of human, one that can emerge only through cameras and screens. At the institution, they were constantly experimenting. They would bring improvisational music to play over the recordings of patients, and they would bring in video synthesizers so that the patients could distort their own images while they watched them. As the experiments got stranger and stranger, the video machines seemed uncannily unpredictable. They couldn't be controlled and seemed to have a life of their own. As Wilmer put it, television is many things: a provocateur, a love object, an intruder, a spy, an exploiter, a cannibal, a hypnotizer, a seducer, finally, a powerful therapeutic weapon, if the means can be found to master the artistic, creative, and technical aspects of the replay. From the record, it's hard to know whether he ever managed to master video, or if he too was eventually mastered by it. As Wilmer was developing his version of the cathode ray mission, another devotee of video, Paul Ryan, was trying to create his own video utopia, a place to produce and protect video monsters. A former Catholic monk, he had converted in his 20s to the new religion of video art, and he carefully studied Wilmer's clinic. He became convinced that videotape feedback, that is, seeing yourself on TV, could revolutionize both individual consciousness and society as a whole. He set his mind to building a videotape commune in upstate New York called Earthscore. He envisioned it as a non-celibate, aesthetic order capable of interpreting ecological systems with video that would be as sturdy and long-lasting as the celibate ascetic order of the monastic tradition. Ryan insisted, like Cronenberg, that video was not primarily a visual medium, but rather one that directly impressed itself upon the body. Video, he wrote, is about perceiving events with the nervous system, not visualizing in a pictorial way. There was no outside and inside to the body. The screen and the skin and the nerves and consciousness were all part of one complex form. As inspiration for the video commune, he looked to the three-dimensional Mobius strip called a Kleinworm. In this form, he wrote, "There is no inside, there's no outside. Instead, you have a contained tube and an uncontained tube, a contained hole and an uncontained hole." You can see the strange ways that the tube feeds into itself and circles around itself. This, he argued, is what videotape did, what videotape feedback did. It would turn you inside out and turn the outside in, triggering your nervous system, manifesting consciousness on the screen. And hallucinations were here as well. The two best ways to achieve this Klein worm of consciousness, he thought, was videotape and LSD. The third, he thought, and it's very sad this never existed, is a giant polyurethane couch in the shape of this Klein worm. The experiments eventually led him to the idea of a commune. The idea, it's wildly Byzantine, but this is the idea in the simplest outlines. It would initially be comprised of 36 people who would all live in pods of 3, called triads. And they would communicate with the other triads primarily through videotaping themselves dancing on Klein worm carpets. Despite the fact that he got $70,000 from the New York Art Council, there wasn't much interest. He only managed to recruit 2 friends, and they all lived in upstate New York for a couple of years, where they produced 45 hours of dance tapes in which they sought to codify this system for society at large. With few people interested, the plan fizzled out. And this possible video future, this possible utopia, vanished into history. Or that's what historians say. When I was digging through the archive of Paul Ryan, which is at the Smithsonian Institute, I came upon a letter that he wrote in 1988. During the austerity of the Reagan years, public funding for the arts had almost completely vanished, and again, in a very Cronenbergian fashion, he had no patron to turn to but the corporate powers he had been so suspicious of in his youth. He read an article in the newspaper that MTV, which had originally only played music videos, was looking to develop original programming. So he wrote them and saw a future for EarthScore. In his letter, he said, "As a video artist, I've developed a cutting-edge format for a TV program that could be syndicated." He hoped, and he explained in the letter, to translate his research into what he called a hybrid between a soap opera and a dating game show. Ryan even told MTV that he had designed a rug that could be mass-produced and sold as a tie-in product. He hoped, he concluded, this system of EarthScore could, quote, become a ritual passage for the TV generation. There's no record of a response from MTV. Did they ignore it? Or did they see in it some mysterious and powerful force, something that they could harness to further serve the monster of video? A few years later, MTV would debut The Real World, which we call reality television, but Ryan's description might be even more apt, a hybrid between soap opera and dating game show. There's no Klein worm rug, and there's no cybernetic triadic choreography. But perhaps they didn't need it. Perhaps, as with Videodrome, EarthScore inhabited some invisible frequency, moving through the subconscious and through the body, connecting to the nerves rather than the eyes. As Cronenberg suggests, there is no transgressive or countercultural impulse that can escape the corporation. It's like a Klein worm. Nothing can remain outside. It is the most fearsome monster, the monster that consumes everything.
That was incredible. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all so much for sticking around, hanging out. Now go out into the world and take the virus of Videodrome with you. Thanks so much for coming to Science on Screen.